This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and for you first-timers, if you're enjoying the content, be sure to like and subscribe. Happy holidays, everybody! So, we are once again still knee-deep in the Steam holiday sale, which means I have more games to play and to look at. But we have a great Critical Thought today. We'll return to the topic of tutorials in game design, and this time I want to talk about one of my all-time favorites. And it's not even from a genre that I particularly am good at, but this is such a great example of a tutorial that it definitely begs to be looked at further, and for you guys, if you're a developer, to take some notes on. Now, if you're fans of Game Wisdom and have listened to a few of the Perceptive podcasts, you should have a good idea of what the game is. But I'll give you a second to think about that before I announce it. As we've talked about before, tutorial design is a very underrated part of good game development. And it's an all more important part when we're talking about competitive or very niche-driven genres. 4X, grand strategy, MOBAs, etc. And the reason is for a competitive game to really remain stable, it needs to have both competitive and casual players. We talked about this in earlier Critical Thought. But if you don't have a casual base who are playing your game and appreciating it, it makes it that much harder for new players to come in, and if they're not coming in, you're just going to be on a pretty much a downward slope in terms of growth. Now, on the game development side, there's two main reasons why tutorials are very hard to develop, or at least hard to make them right. The first one is, as a person who built the game, you're very much already entrenched in the title, and it's very hard for you to look at the game from the perspective of someone who has never picked up the genre or who's coming to this game for the first time. The other point is, game tutorials tend to be developed during the course of the game, and there's always a chance that things can change and be updated. Very rarely will a tutorial be saved for last, after the whole game is done, which is usually the best time to start thinking about it. But then that raises the first point: how are you supposed to develop a tutorial for brand new when you've just spent the last 6 months, year plus, working on the game? And that's why today's tutorial is such a good example, and one that you should really take notes on. And that is Skullgirls. Skullgirls definitely had a lot, I guess, before it came out in terms of strikes against it. This was an indie developer's attempt at making a competitive fighting game to basically stand toe-to-toe with the big names. Soul Calibur, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, BlazBlue, and I'm sure a lot more out there. Smash Brothers, before I forget that. And despite all that against it, Skullgirls turned out to be a very amazing game. Looking fantastic, great gameplay. Again, I am not a hardcore fighting game player, so unfortunately I won't be able to go too much into detail about what it does on that front. But because of the fact that I am not a hardcore fighting player, it allows me to talk a little bit more about the very underrated element of what Skullgirls did right. And that is the tutorial. Fighting games are notorious for bad tutorials. When you have the genre, I think part of it has to do with the fact that the fighting games originally started in the arcades, so there was no tutorials, there was no pre-game kind of play in a sense. You basically enter the game and you're in it from the start. You're not stopping an arcade game to explain, frame canceling, dashes, throw advantages, armor, and all that stuff. And this has certainly been translated to the home market. Many fighting games feature just very lousy tutorials. They either just do nothing but demonstrations, or they only focus on one character. And here's the first major game design note for you guys to write down. If you're trying to teach someone advanced mechanics in play, demonstrations don't work as well as actual hands-on play. The reason is that when you're doing it hands-on, it allows the player to basically see how things work and relates to what they're doing with the controller, gamepad, keyboard, whatever. It also allows them to start building up the muscle memory. And this is all the more important when we're talking about a fighting game, which, as you know, is very muscle memory and hand-eye coordination based. Now, the other point about most fighting games, especially their tutorials, is that they tend to just focus on one character. In, I want to say, either Mortal Kombat 9 or 10, the tutorial was just pretty much Sub-Zero and Scorpion fighting. So yes, you learn what Sub-Zero's moves are, or Scorpion's, but there's at least another dozen or so characters, probably more, to try and learn and figure out. And a lot of what makes fighting games such a challenging and very involved game to learn is the fact that there's a lot under the surface in terms of playing it. There's EX moves, the different kinds of attack ranges, anti-air, frame canceling, which I'm still not 100% sure what that does, but I'm sure most of you who have played fighting games know exactly. And here's the perfect point. The only reason I actually know what the term frame canceling is and stuff like that was from playing the Skullgirls tutorial. Now, we spent about 6 minutes talking about it, but let's actually bring it in and talk why it is such a good tutorial. Now, this goes back again to another talk I've had and a post regarding the 3 essential elements of how to teach someone a game mechanic or systems. And that is, what am I doing? How do I do it? And then why do I do it? And that why, as we've said, is the most complicated part. And if we start talking about that now, we'll be here until probably Christmas Day. But when it comes to the fighting game genre, as we've said, there's a lot of things under the surface that most fighting games don't really tell you. And it's stuff that if you've watched any competitive-based tournament, EVO, local, whatever, you tend to see these things stick out. And I'll give you a good example of that. For the longest time, I didn't realize how much footsies was an important part of fighting games, which is using lay attacks and quick attacks to essentially create distance from your enemies and punish them with rapid attacks to set up longer strings of combos. Now, with Skullgirls, this is not a simple fighting game. It is definitely up there in terms of complexity, different characters, moves, advanced features, stuff like that. And because of that, developers knew that they had to come up with an involved tutorial. And so what they did is pretty much build almost the perfect tutorial. It starts off like any tutorial with the absolute basics, baby's first fighting game. And I know that sounds very derogative, but it's not. When it comes to any kind of complicated game, you want everyone to start out with the same knowledge base. And if they don't, then you have to introduce that. And you always have to assume when you're building a tutorial that you're going to have people who have never touched the genre before. Another good example would be the Plants vs. Zombies tutorial. But again, that's another topic easily. Now with Skullgirls, it starts out again with the pure basics. How do I move? What's the light attack? How do I jump? What does blocking do? Again, these are things that if you've played any fighting game over the last 20 years, you know this stuff pretty much to heart. But as we just said, you need to get everyone to the same base level of knowledge. You can't assume that someone knows why a standing block is different from a crouching block. Now, the next part, and this is where things go from being good to amazing, is that the developers then focus on another section in terms of teaching players. And what they did is they go through and explain every character in the game from start to finish in terms of what they do, all their special moves, what makes them special, or what makes them different from the other characters. And this is pretty much a crash course into Skullgirls. And this is fascinating, and right here, this should be the standard for any kind of fighting game in terms of building your tutorial. Here's a good counterexample. When I loaded up Street Fighter V for the first time, the first thing it shows me is Ken and Ryu fighting. But again, that's not teaching me about the other characters. What does Chun-Li do? What does Zangief do? I don't know. And the only way you're going to even get a partial explanation of that is through demonstration videos. But as we already said, demonstration is not the same as hands-on. And what Skullgirls does, again, it runs through every character and has you make use of it. So I'm going to, again, it's been about a year or two since I played Skullgirls. I do not remember any of the names, unfortunately. But it shows off one of the characters who's pretty much all about grappling. There's another character who's built on range, comboing, etc. And it goes through things, again, in the order of importance, or the order that a player is going to make use of this stuff. And that's another very important part of tutorial design. You need to show things in order of relevancy. Don't teach me about, let's say, how to turn on my windshield wipers while I'm trying to learn how to drive before I even stuck the key into the ignition. And with Skullgirls, again, it goes through this for every character. And honestly, this is more information than a new player would actually need. But that's the point. This is information that's all stored in the game that if I want to go back to, if I want to learn, it's there and I can make use of it. For a new player, they'll probably just go through the absolute basic tutorial, and then maybe they'll try one, and then they'll go try that player out. But then when they go pick another character, they're going to say, well, there's this whole tutorial breaking this character down, let me take a look at it. And it even goes through advanced stuff like what are some good anti-air attacks? How does this character have armor while they're doing their grapple? What's their special moves? Stuff like that. And for each character, this is a good way of explaining things because, again, most fighting games just don't do that. With Mortal Kombat 10, it tells me what Sub-Zero does, doesn't tell me what Liu Kang does, Kung Lao, Sonya, etc. And when you have all this stuff under the surface, again, things like armor, what moves are anti-air, what moves have priority, stuff like that, you need to bring that stuff in because a new player will never know that those things even exist. Especially if they're trying to go online and they're just going to get completely wiped out and then quit the game. Now, that's the beginning and that's the middle, but Skullgirls goes one step further and go to the advanced stuff. This is pretty much the area where the fighting game professionals or the tournament level players will probably load the game up to learn more about. This is when we get into stuff like frame canceling, combos, special move transitions into combos, into EX attacks, into all kinds of crazy stuff. These are the things that you're going to see when you watch EVO and other tournament level matches. And the game does a good enough job explaining this stuff to new players. This was the first time in a game that I actually got to see and started learning about how to attack and then cancel attack and then do another move and start pulling off those crazy tournament level combos that normally I would never even be able to pick up, much less perform even in a practice session. And Skullgirls, again, puts us all down. It categorizes it from beginner, moderate, advanced, and it explains this stuff in a way for new and existing players. And this is what makes it such a great tutorial. Because this allows someone who's either played hundreds of fighting games or who's only played 2 to all be able to learn things and hit that point that everyone has that same level of knowledge. And again, even though this is for the fighting genre, this kind of approach can be adopted into other genres and designs. The MOBA genre, I think, could be amazing with this. Now, with that said, of course, I know what everyone is thinking right now. With MOBAs and games like Street Fighter V, where there are new characters added in, how do you build a tutorial around that? Well, the answer is simple. The tutorial has to be updated. And that's another reason why a lot of designers tend to ignore the tutorial. Because when you have a games as a service and you are building, DLC every month, new levels, new characters, weapons, skills, systems, whatever, how do you keep a tutorial relevant? And of course, the only way to do that is it has to be updated. And unfortunately, this is why a lot of developers tend to ignore that, and why videos, let's plays, how-to guides have become very popular, because they provide immediate updates and immediate revisions to these games. And as a good example of that, Payday 2 took at least, I think, little over 2 years before they actually updated their tutorial with now a stealth and loud kind of heist section. And with like fighting games, like, I mean, imagine a MOBA like League of Legends that every like few weeks they would have to add in a new tutorial for their characters. And unfortunately, that is a lot of work. But if you want to build your game up and present something that is approachable for new players, unfortunately, that is work you need to get done. Especially when you have games like MOBAs and fighting titles where each character, can take who knows how many hours to practice, memorize, learn, and master, hopefully. But we're going to wrap things up here to, I guess, surmise or to have a brief summary of what makes Skullgirls so unique. Again, the tutorial is presented in a logical order of importance, or what a new player will have to learn in order to even start playing the game. There are full hands-on demos or full-on hands-on lessons in order to learn all the moves, and that is a very big part, especially when we talk about advanced plays. Watching the computer perform combos into frame cancels into EX moves is great, but it doesn't exactly build things up from a knowledge base, especially when you start talking about timing. And that's another big thing that I suck at with fighting games, is getting the button press combo timing down. Because as you know, it's not just pressing buttons one after the other. You have to understand the timing in relation to the animation on screen. And my goodness, that is another topic in of itself, I think. And lastly, Skullgirls does enough, or is involved enough, to talk about beginning, medium, and expert level knowledge. And when we talk about the what, the how, and the why, the expert level is definitely when we start bringing in the why conversation. Why do I need to do frame canceling? Well, it's a way to stop a combo or start a brand new attack and keep a combo going on and on and on, as we have certainly seen. And there are other good examples of tutorials out there. Another really fascinating one would be the one for Off-World Trading Company. Well, we start talking about that, that's another 20 minutes, I think. For those of you watching, if you have any other good examples of tutorial designs, especially for complicated or otherwise niche genres, let me know in the comments below. Because again, we really don't talk about tutorial design all that much, and it is underrated when it comes to design. So if there are any out there, be sure to let me know. But otherwise, we're going to wrap things up here. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I am Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Again, happy holidays for those of you watching this. I believe this is Christmas Eve right now. Otherwise, catch you all tomorrow. Don't go too broke on the Steam holiday sale. And we'll talk with more great content here and on GameWisdom.com. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends, it always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.